Hello everybody, this is me, Julian. Today I'd like to talk about Dune 2, the Denis Villeneuve cinematic adaptation of the Frank Herbert novel. Specifically, I'd like to talk about the Hegelian concept of the cunning of reason, as well as the Lacanian concept of the Master Signifier or the Master Frame. Now, I want to say first that I think this is a wonderful film. It's very interesting, it's very rich. I'm not going to discuss it in terms of whether or not it's a successful adaptation. I want to consider it as a cinematic work in its own right. Personally, I think that one of the most interesting scenes in the movie, and one which actually got a surprising amount of laughs when I was in the theater, is when Paul Atreides says that he is not the savior. And at this point, the leader of the Fremen actually goes back to his people and says, "Aha, can't you see? Of course he is the savior, but he is too humble. His humility is precisely further evidence of him being the savior." It's a wonderful sequence with a certain comedic undertone that got a lot of good responses in the movie theater that I was in, but it's also a perfect example of the Master Signifier or the Master Frame. Essentially, the Master Signifier colors in the manner in which you see or view, i.e. interpret everything else, according to a predetermined narrative. This is essentially what the Order of the Bene Gesserit have accomplished. They've introduced a master frame, a master signifier that is all-powerful. Thereby, everything will be interpreted as being a fulfilling of the prophecy, especially any resistance to the prophecy. And I think what's really key here is that Paul Atreides therefore fulfills his destiny precisely by attempting to resist it. This is perhaps the best illustration of the Hegelian concept of the cunning of reason. Hegel never argued that the cunning of reason was that history had a predetermined path that you sort of slavishly had to follow. It was the exact other way around. It was that precisely through the resistance to the Master Signifier, to capital H history, that history unfolded in a predetermined way. Now, when Hegel argues that it is the cunning of reason, he means cunning in a Platonic sense. Remember, for Plato, the Platonic dialogue, or the Socratic dialogue to be precise, in which Socrates argues or debates with his interlocutors, never serves to simply exchange ideas. It's not a panel on television where we get to hear from both sides. Instead, Socrates is always supposed to be the sole philosopher, the one who comes out more wise. In other words, the interlocutor, the respondent, acts as someone who facilitates Socrates' ascendance in his argumentative logical structure. This means that, strictly speaking, he's employing the cunning of reason. He's not simply debating the other person and proving him wrong. He's actually allowing the other person in his resistance to help Socrates unfold his own positions. Therefore, this antithesis, this resistance to Socrates' positions, is a necessary component of the formal mechanism by which his argument achieves its higher synthesis or conclusion. The same can be said from the Hegelian perspective of the cunning of reason. What makes reason, which is for Hegel always synonymous with the idea of history, namely reason, Vernunft versus Verstand, which is simple knowing in the world, i.e. empirical knowing in the world versus a higher idealist knowing, Verstand, Vernunft, understanding, reason. What makes that for Hegel similar to the Socratic dialogue is that the knowing subject doesn't simply willingly participate in the unfolding of reason, but always resists it. And precisely in his resistance thereto, achieves it. The example that Hegel uses actually comes from history. He writes about the assassination of Caesar. Hegel writes that when Caesar was assassinated, it was supposed to be to protect the Republic. And yet what the senators didn't understand or see was that it was precisely the demise of Caesar that would bring about Caesarianism in the reign of Augustus. In other words, the very attempt to save the Republic therefore sealed its fate. And for Hegel, this is the central animating feature of all history, that the things that are supposed to preserve something end up undoing it. Think about today how conservatives think of themselves as being those who protect the past, and yet fundamentally they're the ones who are destroying the future. Now, from the perspective of Dune, of course, Paul Atreides therefore has to undergo a subjective shift by which he realizes that his very resistance is only fueling the narrative, and therefore at a certain point he has to subjectively embrace it. And this is where I think we have perhaps what is the most Hegelian scene in the entire movie. At a certain point, Paul Atreides shows up at the gathering of the tribal leaders, the Fremen. and he is supposed to take his place amongst them. Only a leader is allowed to speak, which would mean that he would have to kill one of them in order to take his place. And at this point, Paul Atreides walks in like a self-destructive fool, as it were. It's like upending the temple. He begins to yell at them in an aggressive, abrasive way and tells them that he will not be one of them, he will be the leader of them. Here we have the moment in which Paul Atreides essentially becomes the Hegelian Master. Instead of simply being the best amongst equals, he is the one who willfully forces his way through what existed hitherto as the norms of that society, therefore imposing himself as the master, the one who can shed the previously existing norms and structures in his name. This is the moment in which Paul Atreides becomes the monster figure. He becomes the Nietzschean Übermensch, if you will, who has identified fully with his role in history. And what's so key about this sequence, I think, is that this sequence is therefore also framed as the moment in which Paul Atreides betrays his love. One of the central themes of this movie is revolutionary or love versus the idea of subjective love. Paul Atreides has individual particular love for a Fremen woman. He is cautioned that this lies in the path of his destiny. His destiny, of course, is a revolutionary love. It's a love for the cause. And at a certain point, he realizes that the love for the cause, therefore, has to outweigh the love for his particular destiny. This means that the movie accomplishes what is essentially completely antithetical to the traditional Hollywood ending. Instead of saying that Paul Atreides is the one who forgoes the cause so as to be with the woman he loves, he actually has to let go of the woman he loves so as to inhabit his destiny. It's a beautiful gesture from Denis Villeneuve, which leaves us with the opposite of a happy ending, namely the love interest going back into the desert, a lover scorned. Now, finally, what I would like to say about this film, apart from the fact that I think there's so much more to be said, and I'd like to explore it in the upcoming live stream lecture, is that the film essentially shows us that the role of the hero, the role of the savior, is always ideologically suspect. As Bertolt Brecht once wrote in, I think it was in the Kaukasische Kreidekreis, or perhaps no, it's in Mother Courage, pity the nation that needs a hero. Indeed, pity the entire world order that needs competing or dueling heroes. And the most Hegelian sequence in the entire movie comes at the very end, when the two Bene Gesserit face off, and the mother, who is the mother of Paul Atreides, who believes that she is the victor of the situation, says to the other Bene Gesserit, "You have chosen the wrong side." At which point she looks at her and says, "You are so naive because you still believe in sides." And here we're back at the Hegelian unity of opposites. The ideological pessimism of this movie is that the very act of resistance against the oppressors only further fuels the oppression. Therefore, the realization that Paul Atreides has that he himself is Harkonnen should be taken on a much more broad level. It's not simply that he is of the same bloodline as the very evil that he is fighting. It is that he himself is evil in the disguise of good. Or, to put it in Hegelian terms, evil is simply the good which believes itself to be absolutely good. Therefore, what this movie does so brilliantly in a very Hegelian way is that it exposes the ideology of Hollywood. It essentially argues that this mythological narrative of the savior figure who's supposed to combat and overcome evil is itself the face or the guise of evil. And personally, I'm looking forward to seeing how audiences will react to that in the third installment. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll try to record a longer lecture on this in my live stream. Until then, thank you so much, and don't forget to become a patron because you'll be able to download my ebook and all of my lectures and more stuff. See you then.